Welcome to the Tao at Night. Tonight we are following water, not a single great river, but something quieter, the countless small streams that begin in the high places, in the dark, in the cold where the mist gathers and the ground has been holding what it received from the sky. Each one finding its own way down, each one moving through the dark without knowing where it is going, only that the going is downward, and the direction is always towards something larger than itself. The ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, known in the West as Zhuangzi, told stories not to explain the Tao but to gesture at it. Stories that catch the mind off guard, that say something sideways about the nature of the whole. Tonight we will sit with one of the quietest gestures in all his teaching. The stream that does not know it is the sea, and the moment when it finds out that it was always already becoming one. The central insight is gentle but large. Every stream believes for a while that it is traveling alone, carving its own path, carrying its own identity, doing the specific and private work of being itself. But the sea does not require the stream to arrive as anything in particular. It only asks that the stream keep moving, and what feels at the end like loss, the dissolution of the separate name, the particular shape, the story of where this water came from, is only ever arrival. You do not need to know anything about Taoist philosophy to be here tonight. These teachings are for anyone who has ever felt the particular weight of carrying their own separateness, the accumulated names for who they are, where they have been, what they carry, and wondered if there was a gentler way to set some of that down before sleep. Over these 13 chapters, we will follow the stream's journey through 13 different wisdom traditions, each of which has, in its own way and its own time, understood the same deep thing, that what moves toward wholeness does not lose itself. It discovers what it already was. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here, only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. The stream does not hurry. It simply continues, and continuing is enough. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. Zhuangzi told a story about a frog who had never left the well, who believed the sky was the size of the circle visible from the bottom, and the world was made of the stone walls within reach. The frog was not wrong about what it had seen. It was only wrong about the size of what there was to see. We carry this frog's error in a particular way. We believe our name for ourselves is the whole of what we are. The story of where we came from, the particular path we have traveled, the accumulated identity of the long journey, we hold these as definitions. This is who I am. This is where I have been. This is what makes me distinct from the water in the next stream. But the sea receives all the streams. It does not read their origins. It does not sort the water that came from the northern mountain from the water that came from the eastern valley. What enters the sea becomes the sea. The particular journey has ended, the particular destination has been reached, and the stream in that moment discovers that what it feared as dissolution was only ever the completion of the journey it was always on. Tonight's first chapter asks, what are you carrying that was meant only for the journey? What names, what histories, what careful distinctions between this self and all the others? What are you holding that the sea will not need you to hold? You may find that some of it has been heavier than you knew. There was once a young woman who had been traveling for many years. She had set out from her home when she was still young. Not from unhappiness, but from the kind of restlessness that some people carry from birth, the quality of a person who is always moving towards something that does not yet have a name. She had traveled through many places, each with its own landscape and its own customs and its own way of marking the world. And in each place she had learned something, had acquired not only knowledge, but a piece of the place itself, something she carried forward when she moved on. By the time she had been traveling for several years, she found that the traveling itself had become harder, not because the roads were worse or her body was weaker, because she was carrying more than she had started with, in a way she could not easily account for. She could not have named what was heavy, but she noticed it in the difference between how quickly she had moved at the beginning and how slowly she moved now. She noticed it in the way she approached a new place with less openness than she had carried before, more comparison, more reference to what had come before, more of the accumulation of her particular experience being laid over whatever was actually here. One evening she came to rest at a place where a Sufi teacher sat near a small fire, and the teacher watched her arrive with the slow heaviness that she had not yet entirely noticed in herself. "You have been many places," the teacher said. "Many," the young woman agreed. "And you have brought all of them with you," the teacher said. She looked at him. "How else would you travel?" she asked. "Each place has taught me something. I carry what I have learned." "Yes," the teacher said. He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me, when you left your home, did you carry it with you?" "I carried memories of it," she said. "And the second place?" "The same." "And now," the teacher said, "you are carrying memories of every place you have passed through, the weight of every home that was not quite yours, every relationship that formed and then had to be held at a distance, every teaching that had to be translated into something portable." He looked at the fire. "How much room does that leave for whatever is here?" She considered this. The answer, she realized, was not much. She was encountering this present place primarily through the filter of everywhere she had been before. "But if I set down what I have learned," she said slowly, "what do I have? I would arrive here with nothing." "You would arrive here with yourself," the teacher said, "which is what you started with, and which is the only thing that every journey has actually been adding to." He paused. "The water that has traveled from the mountain does not forget the mountain when it reaches the sea. The journey is written into it. But the water does not carry a stone from the mountain to remind itself where it came from. It carries the having been there, which is a different thing, much lighter." She was quiet for a while. "How do you set down the stone?" she asked, "without setting down the journey?" By understanding that the journey is not in the stone, he said, the journey is in the traveller. The stone is only something you picked up along the way and began to confuse for proof that you had been somewhere. He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. What would you leave if you left the stones? Only the woman who has travelled everywhere, which is a great deal more than you think. She sat with this for the rest of the evening. In the morning, before she left, she spent some time with the internal inventory. Not the physical things, those were simple and few, but the less tangible accumulation. The comparison she had been making between every new place and the last place that had been good. The catalogue of impressions she had built about each city she had passed through. The particular quality of attention she had developed, which was skilled at recognizing what was similar to something she had already encountered and less available for something genuinely new on its own terms. She could not set this down in a single morning. These things do not set themselves down in single mornings, but she could notice it. And noticing, she found, was the beginning of something, the beginning of a loosening, of space opening in the attention that had been occupied by the stones. She left with the same load she had arrived with, but the quality of the carrying had shifted slightly. The stones were still there. She was no longer confused about whether they were what was carrying her. The teacher did not speak about it again, but when she left, she noticed that she felt, in some difficult-to-name way, lighter. Not because she had lost anything, because she had remembered what she was carrying and what was carrying her. In Sufi tradition, this distinction between what the traveller carries and what carries the traveller is expressed through the concept of fana, the annihilation of the small self in the larger reality. This sounds at first alarming. Annihilation is not a comfortable word, but the Sufi understanding of fana is closer to the stream entering the sea than to any kind of destruction. The great Sufi poet Rumi described this dissolving as the moment when the drop of water realizes it is the ocean. Not that the drop disappears, but that it recognizes what it was always made of. The small form gives way. The essential nature remains and, in remaining, expands into what it always was. There is also in Sufi teaching the concept of musafir, the traveller who travels not to acquire but to empty, not to accumulate but to shed the accretions that prevent genuine encounter with the present. The great teachers of this tradition moved with few possessions and attached significance to the quality of their attention rather than the catalogue of their experiences. They understood that the traveller who carries everything they have seen cannot see what is actually here. The young woman's discovery that the journey is in the traveller, not the stones, is Musafir teaching in its most practical form. You are not what you have accumulated on the way. You are the capacity that has been making the journey. That capacity, properly understood, is already everything it needs to be. Think about what you are carrying into this night that was meant only for the day. Not the experiences themselves. They are part of you, woven in, not a burden at all. The stones, the things you picked up along the way as evidence, the worry that you are carrying forward from this morning to prove that you are taking things seriously. the comparison between today and how you hoped today would be, the particular weight of this week's version of your life held up against some imagined version that would be better. These are the stones. They do not contain the journey. The journey is in you already and cannot be left behind, no matter how many stones you set down. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific heaviness of bringing yesterday's difficulty into today, before today has had a chance to be anything. In the weight of the accumulated narrative of a hard period, carried forward into each new morning as proof of what is wrong, when each new morning is also genuinely new. You may have felt this yourself in the rare morning when you woke without the weight, when, just for a moment or an hour, the accumulated story of what was wrong did not immediately reassemble itself, and you were simply here, light, with no particular stone in hand. And how different that morning felt from the ones where the weight was the first thing that arrived. Right now, in this breath, you are the stream after a long journey. The sea is close. The things you have been carrying as identification, the names, the narratives, the evidence of who you are and where you have been, the sea does not need them. You can arrive with nothing but the movement itself. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi wrote about the value of following what is natural, not the false natural of habit, which only feels natural because it is familiar, but the genuine natural of a thing expressing its own deepest inclination. Water does not decide to flow downhill. The decision is not available to it. It flows downhill because flowing downhill is what water is, and any other direction would be the absence of itself. For those of us who have lost our direction in the dark, the question Zhuangzi would ask is, what is the downhill of your own nature? Not what you have decided you want, which is often a complex mixture of genuine desire and borrowed expectation and the accumulated pressure of what has been said about you, but what you naturally move toward when the deciding stops. Water, in the dark, always finds its way, not because it has a map, because it follows the simple principle of its own nature, which is to go where the going is low, and the low places are always, eventually, connected to the sea. The stream does not navigate to the sea, it navigates to the next lower place, and the next lower place is connected to another lower place. And the arriving at the sea, when it happens, is the result not of one long calculation, but of 1,000 small, natural, unconsidered movements, each of which was only ever going one step at a time. There was once a young hunter who became lost in the dark. He had been out longer than he had intended, following something that had led him further into unfamiliar territory than he had meant to go, and by the time he decided to return, the light had gone and the landmarks he had been noting on the way out were invisible in the darkness. He knew roughly which direction home was, but roughly is different from certainly, and in the dark, on unfamiliar ground, roughly is not always enough. He began walking in the direction he believed was right. He walked for some time. Nothing familiar appeared, The darkness and the terrain both gave him nothing he recognized, and after a while he was no longer certain that he was walking in the right direction at all. He stopped. The disorientation of not knowing where he was in relation to where he wanted to be had produced a specific kind of fear. The fear that every step might be making things worse rather than better. He had been sitting on a fallen log for some time, trying to think his way to a certainty he did not have, when he heard movement in the dark ahead of him, and then an old voice. "Young man," the voice said, "you are sitting the wrong way." He looked up. An elder from his own community stood at the edge of the darkness, returning from somewhere of his own. "I am lost," the young hunter said. "I know," the elder said. "I could hear you thinking." He sat down on a nearby stone. "What are you trying to find?" "Home," the young hunter said. "And what are you using to find it?" "Landmarks," the young hunter said. "But I cannot see any landmarks." "No," the elder agreed. "So you are using a tool that is not available to you, and the unavailability of the tool is making you certain that you cannot find your way." He paused. "What is always available to you in the dark?" The young hunter thought. "Sound," he said. "Wind." "And water," the elder said. "There is water everywhere here. You cannot see it, but you have been within sound of it for the past hour." He was quiet for a moment, and the young hunter listened, and there it was, the sound he had been not hearing because he had been so concentrated on the landmarks he could not find, the sound of small water moving, not far away. "The water does not need to know where home is," the elder said. "The water only needs to know where down is, and down from here goes toward the valley, and the valley is where home is. The water will take you not by knowing your destination, but by following its own nature." "What if the water doesn't go that way?" the young hunter asked. "Then we follow it until it meets other water, which also knows where down is," the elder said. "Eventually, everything that knows where down is will bring you to the low place, and the low place is always known." They found the stream. They followed it. It did not go directly toward home. It wandered, as small streams wander, through the terrain's own logic. But it went consistently lower and lower and lower still, and the lower they went, the more familiar everything became, until at last they reached the valley where the fires were visible, and the path was obvious, and the young hunter understood what he had been trying to do and what he had needed to do instead. "I was trying to navigate," he said. "Yes," the elder said. "The stream was navigating differently." "The stream was not navigating at all," the elder said. "It was only being water, and being water in this landscape always arrives at the valley." He looked at the young man. "You cannot always see your landmarks, but you are always within sound of something that knows where down is." The young hunter carried this for the rest of his life. Not as a survival technique, though it was one, as a teaching about the difference between the navigation that requires a map you do not have and the navigation that requires only honest attention to the nature you do have. Down, for water, is always available. What is always available to you? Lakota teaching holds the natural world as a continuous teacher, not a metaphor for human truths, but a living presence that expresses what the Lakota call Wakan Tanka, the great mystery in every form it takes. The stream that finds the valley without a map is not doing something that would impress a Lakota elder as remarkable. It is doing exactly what a stream does, which is the same as doing exactly what it is. The concept of mitakuye oyasing, all my relations, holds that the human being is in relationship not only with other humans, but with every aspect of the living world, including the water. And relationship implies communication. The water has something to tell the person who is genuinely listening, not in words, in the kind of telling that is available to those who are quiet enough to receive it. There is also in Lakota tradition the teaching of the heyoka, the sacred contrarian, the person who moves backward to show which direction is forward. The young hunter's error was the error the heyoka is always gently mocking, trying to find your way by the methods that do not apply to the situation, instead of the methods that do. The landmarks were the right tool in the light and the wrong tool in the dark. The water was available the whole time. The young hunter's sophistication had been drowning out what the simpler thing was trying to tell him. Following what is genuinely natural, what is available, what the situation is actually offering, is a form of intelligence that Zhuangzi would have recognized immediately. The sage knows what the stream knows, not everything, only the next step. Think about a time when you were using the wrong tool for the situation, trying to navigate by landmarks that were not visible, when something simpler and more available was waiting to be followed. The thing that often replaces the water in human life is thinking. Specifically, the kind of thinking that tries to navigate by a map of what should be true, in circumstances where what is actually true is the only reliable guide. The mind that keeps trying to find its way by the landmarks it expected to find, when the terrain has changed and the water is running nearby and could take you exactly where you need to go if you would stop talking long enough to hear it. This shows up in ordinary life in the difference between the problem that resolves in the shower when thinking has stopped and the simpler current of what you actually know takes over, and the problem that never resolves at the desk, where the thinking is very busy and the water is inaudible. The shower is not smarter than the desk, it is quieter, and the quiet makes the water audible. You may have felt this yourself in the specific clarity that arrives in the body rather than the mind, the gut sense, the felt direction, the quality of knowing that arrives not as a thought, but as a certainty in the chest or the feet. That is the water. That is the thing that knows where down is, not by deliberation, but by nature. Right now, in this breath, the landmarks are not required. The water is running. It knows exactly where to go from here, has always known, carries the knowing in its nature, needs nothing from you but the willingness to follow. Let the mind go quiet enough that you can hear which way the water is moving. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi was suspicious of the self that insists too much on its own uniqueness. Not because uniqueness is unreal. Each stream is genuinely its own stream, carving its own path, carrying its own particular mixture of what it has flowed through. But the insistence on the uniqueness, the continuous maintenance of the distinction between this stream and all the others, takes effort. And that effort uses something that could otherwise be used for moving. The philosopher who spent his life cataloguing his own opinions would find, in Zhuangzi's telling, that the catalogue had become the obstacle to philosophy. The student who was too attached to the particular form of their own understanding would find that the form had become a wall between themselves and what the teaching was pointing at. The water that had decided it was too particular to join other water would find itself in a pool, still going nowhere. The Stoics, approaching this from an entirely different direction and arriving at something interestingly similar, noticed that the self which is most attached to its own opinions is the self most closed to learning. And the self most closed to learning is, in Stoic terms, the self most distant from virtue. Because virtue in this tradition is not a collection of fixed qualities, but a continuous, responsive relationship with what is actually true. Uniqueness is real, but it does not require defense, and defending it is the most reliable way to stop being genuinely unique, because genuine uniqueness is expressed in movement, not in the preservation of a particular form. There was once a student who was certain of the importance of his own perspective. This is not an unusual student. He was, in many ways, a good student. He thought carefully, he read widely, he could articulate his positions with clarity and defend them with competence. What distinguished him from other good students was the degree to which his thinking was, without his quite noticing it, circular. He thought carefully, but he thought carefully within a particular set of assumptions that he had established early and not examined since. He read widely, but he selected what he read from within a range that tended to confirm what he already believed. He could defend his positions well because he had been defending the same positions for years. His teacher observed this with patience. "Tell me," the teacher said one afternoon, "what would change your mind?" The student thought about it. He offered some conditions. If the evidence were to show this, if the argument were to demonstrate that, the conditions were reasonable, but the teacher noticed that they were all conditions the student believed would never actually be met. "You have given me conditions for changing your mind," the teacher said, "but they are conditions that you believe are impossible to fulfill." The student started to object. "Consider," the teacher said gently. "The stream that has decided its path is the right path, and that any other path would be a deviation from its proper course. What happens to that stream?" The student thought. "It arrives at the sea," he said. "Does it?" the teacher asked. "Or does it carve a channel and then fill the channel, and then find that the channel is full and there is nowhere to go?" The student sat with this. "The stream arrives at the sea," the teacher said, "precisely because it does not insist on its path. The path is determined by the terrain. The stream follows the terrain. When the terrain offers a new direction, the stream takes it. This is not inconsistency. This is the kind of faithfulness to the actual landscape that is the only thing that actually arrives anywhere." "But my reasoning," the student said, "is not a stream. It has to be consistent. A thought that contradicts itself is not a thought." "No," the teacher agreed. "Consistency is a real virtue in reasoning. I am not asking you to contradict yourself. I am asking whether your consistency is with the truth as you understand it, which must grow as you encounter more, or with the truth as you decided it was some time ago and have been defending since." He paused. "The stream that is consistent with water, that always goes where water goes, which is always down, will travel any path the terrain offers. The stream that is consistent with the path it happened to take yesterday will find that the path has ended and it has nowhere to go." The student left that conversation unsatisfied. The unsatisfaction was a specific quality, not the unsatisfaction of having been wrong in a way he could identify and correct, but the unsatisfaction of a question he could not get around. He carried it for several months, and in those months he found, with some discomfort, that he was noticing things he had not been noticing before, places where the terrain was offering a different direction, and he had been remaining in the channel because the channel was familiar. He came back to the teacher. "I think I see the channel," he said. "Good," the teacher said. "The channel is not wrong. You built it by doing real work. But a channel is not a river. A river moves, a channel holds." "How do I become a river again?" the student asked. "By caring more about where the water goes," the teacher said, "than about the path you built to carry it." The student sat with this for a moment. "And the water," he said slowly, "goes where?" "Wherever is actually lower," the teacher said. "Not wherever you decided was lower when you started, wherever the terrain as it is now shows is lower." He looked at the student. "This is not the same as having no direction. The water always has a direction. Down is always down, but down in one place is not always down in the next place. The wise reasoner moves toward the truth as it is, including the truth that some things they thought were down turn out to be up when examined more carefully." The student left that second conversation different from how he had left the first. The first had left him unsatisfied. The second left him, strangely, more at rest. Not because the uncertainty was resolved, because he had been given a principle that could live with uncertainty without fighting it. Stoic philosophy holds at its center the practice of prosoche, attention, self-examination, the continuous practice of turning the philosopher's inquiry back on the philosopher's own assumptions and asking whether what is believed is genuinely true or only defensively maintained. The Stoic exercise of memento mori, remembering death, was understood as, among other things, a practice of perspective. In the long view, the specific positions we have been defending are small. The specific uniqueness we have been maintaining against the encroachments of other perspectives is temporary. What remains, in the Stoic view, is the quality of the reasoning itself, not the conclusions it arrived at, which will be revised, but the honesty and rigor and genuine openness with which it engaged with what was true. Marcus Aurelius returned frequently in his private journals to the theme of the self that insists on its own importance. Not with contempt, he was not self-hating, but with the recognition that the insistence on uniqueness was, in his experience, almost always the sign of a fear rather than a truth. The fear that if the particular position is released, nothing will remain. And the recurring discovery that what remained, when the particular position was released, was something larger and more genuinely the self than the defended position had ever been. The student's discovery that the channel and the river are different qualities of movement is this Stoic teaching in its Zhuangzi form. Not the argument about uniqueness, but the image of what happens to water when it stops moving. Think about where in your life you are maintaining a channel rather than a river. A position you have been defending for a long time, not because the defense is necessary, but because the defense has become familiar. An opinion about yourself: I am this kind of person, I am not that kind of person, that has been serving as an identity more than as an accurate observation. A story about what is possible for you, or not possible, that was formed a long time ago in conditions that have since changed. These are the channels. They were built by real work, and they have real walls, and there is a particular security in being inside them. The current still moves, but only in the direction the channel allows. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific experience of meeting someone who has a very consistent opinion about everything. Consistent in the sense of all opinions pointing the same direction, all evidence interpreted through the same filter. The consistency is real, but it is the consistency of the channel, not the river. The river is also consistent. It is always water, always moving toward lower ground, but it does not always go in the same direction, because the terrain is not always the same. You may have felt this yourself in the unexpected freedom of a moment when a position you had been holding gave way, when you admitted to yourself or to someone else that you were wrong about something, or uncertain about something, or open to something you had previously closed. And the feeling was not loss but relief. The walls of the channel dissolved. The water moved again. Right now, in this breath, there is nothing to maintain. The self that arrives at sleep does not need to be the same self in every detail that woke this morning. The river is always water. It does not need to be always the same river. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi asked, in one of his most famous passages, whether he was a man dreaming of being a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of being a man. He was not being playful in the way the question makes it seem. He was pointing at the boundary between the self and what is not the self, and suggesting that the boundary, which we maintain with such energy and such certainty, may be more permeable than we assume. The stream believes it is distinct from the ocean. It has every reason to believe this. It looks different, moves differently, is contained in a particular channel, while the ocean is vast and salt-tinged and without boundaries. But the stream is made of the same water as the ocean, and the ocean is made of the same water as the rain that became the stream. The distinction is real. These are different forms, but the boundary between them is not what either of them thinks it is. In the Hindu understanding of this teaching, the word for the small self, the self that believes itself separate and distinct and bounded, is jiva, and the word for the large self, the vast, undivided awareness of which the small self is an expression, is Atman, which is ultimately understood to be the same as Brahman, the whole. The small self's journey toward the large self is not the small self traveling to something outside itself. It is the small self discovering what it was always made of. The stream is not traveling to the sea. The stream is the sea, moving. There was once a young ascetic who was afraid of the ocean. He had been practicing for many years, fasting, meditation, the careful cultivation of detachment from the things of the world. He had done genuine work, and the work had produced genuine results. He was quieter than he had been, more present, less driven by the small urgencies that had occupied him before the practice. But there was one teaching he could not receive. His teacher had told him that the final destination of the practice, the thing all the years of refinement were moving toward, was the dissolution of the separate self into something vast and undivided. The teaching called it different things at different times, the ocean of being, the ground of consciousness, the great undivided awareness. And the young ascetic, who had worked very hard on the particular self that he was, heard this teaching as a kind of death. If the self dissolves, he said to his teacher one morning, what is left? What is in the water, the teacher said, when the river reaches the sea? The water, the young ascetic said. And if I take the river's water and the sea's water, the teacher said, and put them together in the same vessel, can you separate them? No, the young ascetic admitted. Which dissolved into which? The teacher asked. He sat with this. Neither, he said slowly. They are just water. Yes, the teacher said. The river did not lose its water when it reached the sea. The water did not disappear. It became part of something that was already made of exactly what the river is made of. He looked at the young ascetic. What you fear losing is the name, the shape, the story of the particular path this water took to arrive here. And those things, the name, the shape, the story, are genuinely yours, genuinely true, genuinely part of what you have been. But they are not what you are made of. What am I made of? The young ascetic asked. The same thing the sea is made of, the teacher said simply. The young ascetic spent a long time with this. He returned to it in the meditation, not pushing it, not trying to resolve it, simply sitting with it the way you sit with a question that is larger than an answer. And in the sitting, something gradually shifted. Not the understanding exactly, which remained incomplete in the way that genuine understanding of large things always remains incomplete. But the fear softened. He could not say exactly when it happened. He noticed it one morning during the practice when the usual sense of working toward something, the quality of effort that had accompanied the meditation for years, was absent. He was simply sitting, not working toward the ocean, already in it, already made of it. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands. They were the same hands they had always been. The particular form was still here. I am still here, he said to his teacher when he described this. Of course, the teacher said. The river is still here. Look. He pointed out the window to the river that ran near the ashram. It reached the sea years ago, and yet it is still here, still moving, still itself. The ocean is not a destination the river travels to and then stops existing. The river is always entering the sea. The sea is always already the river. The young ascetic looked at the river for a long time. He had spent years trying to prepare himself to lose something. He had not understood until this morning that there was nothing to lose, only something to discover that was already present, had been present the whole time, and was not waiting for him at the end of the journey, but was, in some sense that he could not fully articulate, what was making the journey possible. Hindu philosophy holds the teaching of Tak Twam Asi, thou art that, as one of the four great sayings of the Upanishads. The self you believe yourself to be is that which is also the vast undivided whole. Not that the small self is unreal, but that its reality is not separate from the reality of everything else. The boundary is real at one level of description and non-existent at another. The Bhagavad Gita approaches this from the angle of action. The person who acts without attachment to the fruits of the action, who does what they do without the separate self insisting on being the one who does it, is in yoga, in union, not in the sense of losing themselves, but in the sense of doing what they do as an expression of the whole rather than as the project of the small self. There is also in Hindu teaching the image of the flame and the lantern. The light that comes from 1,000 lanterns appears to be 1,000 different lights, but is one light, expressed through 1,000 different forms. The lantern is not diminished by sharing the light. The light is not divided by being expressed in many forms. This is the young ascetic's discovery in a different image. The particular form, the lantern, the river, is real and not required to be given up. Only the belief that the light within it is separate from all the other light needs to be examined. Think about the things you fear losing in the dissolving. Not abstract things, specific ones. The qualities you have worked to develop, the understanding you have earned, the particular person you have become through everything you have been through. These feel, understandably, like things that could be lost if you let yourself go too deep into rest, into sleep, into the ocean of the night. They will not be lost. The river that enters the sea carries with it everything it has been. The particular path, the particular journey, the quality of what this water has flowed through, all of this is present in the water as it enters the vast. It does not need to hold a separate form to remain real. It is present in the movement of the sea, which is nothing other than the movement of all the water that has arrived from everywhere. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific fear of sleep that some people carry, the sense that in fully letting go, something will be misplaced or missed, that staying at the edge of consciousness is a kind of maintenance of the self that deep sleep would interrupt. It is a real fear, and it is the young ascetic's fear translated into the ordinary, the belief that the separate form must be maintained, must stay distinct, or something will be lost. You may have felt this yourself in the quality of those rare mornings when you woke from very deep sleep, from the kind of sleep where you were genuinely not anywhere, where consciousness had genuinely dissolved, and found yourself still here, the same person. Nothing lost, something, if anything, restored. Right now, in this breath, the ocean is closer than you think, and it is made of exactly what you are made of. Arriving there is not loss. It is what you have been moving toward every night of your life, and every time you have arrived, you woke in the morning still yourself. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi told a story about Cook Ding, who had been butchering oxen for so long that he no longer saw the ox. He saw only the spaces, the natural openings in the structure, the places where his knife could move without resistance, where the work could proceed in harmony with what was already there. He had stopped using his eyes and started using something else, some quality of understanding that was more comprehensive and more accurate than vision alone. The teaching is partly about skill, but it is also about the quality of attention that makes a certain kind of knowing possible, the attention that is not pressing against the surface, but moving through the structure, following the natural grain of what is there. For understanding, for teaching, for the passing of wisdom from one person to another, this quality of attention reveals something specific, that the teaching cannot be fully contained in the words of the teaching. The words are the knife moving through the surface. The actual teaching is in the spaces, in the places between the words where something moves that words cannot carry. And the student who is attached to the words has received the knife's path. The student who has received what the words were trying to carry, that student has understood. This is the Buddhist teaching of the raft. The raft is not the shore. The teaching is not the truth. The teaching is a vehicle. And the student who reaches the far shore carrying the raft on their back has misunderstood what the raft was for. There was once a young monk who could not let the words go. He had studied with a teacher he loved and trusted, a teacher whose way of explaining things had opened something in him that had not been opened before, and whose specific phrases and particular formulations had become, for the young monk, the container of the teaching itself. He could recall them exactly. He returned to them when he was confused, the way you might return to a letter from someone you loved when you needed to hear their voice. His teacher had died the previous year, and the young monk found that he was, in an unexpected way, more attached to the words than he had been when the teacher was present, because when the teacher was present, the words were just how the teaching arrived, and the teaching was alive and growing and different in each conversation. Now the teacher was gone, and the words were all that remained, and they carried a weight they had not carried before. He had come to sit with an older monk in the same tradition who had known his teacher and who had, over many years, arrived at a very still quality of understanding. My teacher also said, the young monk continued, and offered another. The older monk listened again. These are good words, the older monk said, when the young monk finished. Your teacher was a good teacher. What did the words point at? The young monk looked at him. I mean, the older monk said gently, when your teacher said this, what was your teacher pointing you toward? Not what did your teacher say, but what were you meant to see when you looked in that direction? The young monk thought. He could feel in the thinking a kind of reach toward the memory of what had happened in him when the words first arrived, which was distinct from the words themselves. There was a quality, he said slowly, of space, like the room got larger. And is that quality in the words? The older monk asked. No, the young monk said after a moment. The quality was in me. The words were how I came to it. Yes, the older monk said, the words were the raft. The quality, the space in the room was the far shore, and the raft arrived you there. But you have been carrying the raft for a year now, and the weight of it is considerable. He was quiet for a moment. Your teacher is not in the words. Your teacher is in the quality that the words pointed you toward. That quality lives in you now, not in the phrases, and you can reach it again without the phrases because you already know what it feels like. The raft has done its work. The young monk felt something in him resist this. If I put down the words, he said, I feel as though I am putting down my teacher. I understand, the older monk said with genuine warmth. This is very human. We confuse the person with the container the person used to reach us. He paused. But think about this. Your teacher knew many languages and taught in all of them. The same teaching arrived in different words to different students. The students who received the teaching in a different language, do you think they received less of your teacher than you did because the words were different? No, the young monk said quietly. So the teaching is not in the words, the older monk said. The teaching is in what the words point at, and what the words point at is present in you now without the words. Let the words rest. What remains is not less than what was there when the teacher spoke them. It is the same thing, alive in you, which is the only place it was ever going to live. The young monk returned to his meditation. And for the first time in a year, he sat without a phrase, without the interior recitation of what the teacher had said. The silence was uncomfortable at first, and then it was simply silence. And in the silence, slowly, the quality was there, the space, the room getting larger, and it arrived without the words which had always been the point. Buddhist teaching on this question, the relationship between the teaching and what the teaching is pointing at, is explicit in the Pali Canon. The Buddha himself used the raft metaphor. The Dharma, he said, is like a raft, useful for crossing the river. Once you have crossed, you do not carry the raft on your head. You leave it behind and walk on the far shore with free hands. This teaching is sometimes misread as saying that the Dharma is unimportant or that study is unnecessary. It does not say this. The raft is necessary to cross the river. The study is necessary to reach what the study is pointing at. What the teaching warns against is the confusion between the vehicle and the destination, the specific error of the student who masters the teaching perfectly and never arrives at what the teaching was trying to deliver. There is also in Buddhist teaching the concept of upaya, skillful means. The teaching is always adjusted to the listener. The same truth is expressed differently for different minds in different circumstances. What this implies is that no particular formulation of the truth is the truth itself. Every formulation is a vehicle appropriate for some listener in some circumstance, and not for all listeners in all circumstances. The young monk's difficulty, the attachment to the specific words of the beloved teacher, is a form of grief as much as a philosophical error, and the older monk's response understands this. The words were the way the teacher arrived. The teaching that arrived through the words does not leave when the teacher does. It lives in the student who received it, which is the form the teaching was always trying to take. Think about a teaching or a person you have been holding in a form that may no longer serve the holding, not with any judgment of the holding. The young monk was doing something entirely loving and understandable, but consider, the thing you are holding, in the form you are holding it, is the form serving what you love, or has the form become more important than what it was carrying? The letter from someone who has died, held so tightly that the person in the letter has become the letter, rather than the living memory of the actual person who was nothing like a letter. The teaching from a mentor, repeated so exactly that it has become a quotation rather than a living understanding. The tradition maintained so precisely that the spirit that was the point of the tradition has been sealed inside the exact form of the practice. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific grief of losing someone who gave you language for things, who had phrases and ways of putting things that made the world navigable, and whose absence has left you without those phrases, and the absence of the phrases feels like the absence of the person and of the navigability both. You may have felt this yourself in the moment of discovering that you had internalized what you loved, that you could hear the voice without playing the recording, could access the quality without reading the letter, could navigate without the exact words, because the understanding was in you and had been in you all along. Right now, in this breath, the teaching that has reached you is here, in you, not in any form. The stream of what you have received does not need to be carried in a separate vessel. It flows in you. Let the vessel rest. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi understood that what we are traveling toward is not something we have never touched, not a foreign shore, not a distant paradise, not a state of being so different from this one that arriving there would make the arrival unrecognizable. What we are traveling toward is more like the thing we have always been, recognized at last, freed from the accretions that made it difficult to see. The stream traveling toward the sea is not traveling toward something alien. It is made of the same water as the sea. The arrival is a recognition. This is what I was the whole time. The journey was not the acquiring of something new. It was the letting go of the belief that I was something separate from what I am now joining. This teaching appears in many traditions in the specific form of a teaching about what can be lost and what cannot. What can be lost are the external things, the possessions, the positions, the roles, the opinions others hold about us. What cannot be lost is the essential nature, the quality that is genuinely the self, underneath all the acquired forms. And the teaching across traditions is consistent. What cannot be lost does not need to be protected. The energy spent protecting it could be spent on something that actually requires protection. The Hasidic teachers were particularly clear about this. What is truly yours cannot be taken. The framing of everything as potentially losable, as needing protection and maintenance and defense, is the framing of someone who does not yet know what is actually theirs. There was once a young scholar who was afraid of the next stage of the journey. He had done substantial work. He had studied and practiced and arrived, after many years, at a level of understanding that his community recognized and valued. He had earned something real, not just the recognition, but the internal quality that the recognition was responding to. He genuinely understood things that he had not understood before, in the way that changes how you see rather than simply adding to what you know. But there had been a teacher in his life, a rabbi who had died recently, who had suggested to him in their last conversation that what was next would require him to give up something of what he had acquired. Not the knowledge exactly, but the relationship to the knowledge, the way of holding it, something about how it was his. He had been thinking about this for months, and what he had arrived at was a specific anxiety that the next stage would require him to become less than he was, to return to a kind of not knowing that was a regression rather than a progression. He brought this to an elder teacher who had known the rabbi and who understood what the rabbi had been pointing toward. "Tell me what you are afraid to lose," the elder said. The young scholar articulated it carefully, the clarity, the precision, the way he could now hold complex things and see how they related, the quality of his understanding. He did not want to be returned to confusion. "And who would you be without that understanding?" the elder asked. "Less," the young scholar said. "Are you certain?" the elder asked. "Or are you uncertain and calling the uncertainty less?" He sat with this. "The understanding you have acquired," the elder continued, "is genuinely yours. I am not disputing that, but I want to ask you, do you believe something can be taken from you that is genuinely yours?" "Yes," the young scholar said, "many things can be taken." "Things," the elder agreed, "positions, possessions, recognition, these can be taken because they were given, and what is given can be ungiven." He paused. "But the understanding you have built, not the recognition of it, not other people's awareness that you have it, but the actual change in how you see, who would take that?" The young scholar thought. "No one," he said. "It cannot be taken," the elder said. And the rabbi's suggestion was not that it would be taken. The suggestion was that you would be asked to hold it differently, not as something you have earned and can display and can defend if necessary, but as something you are, which is different. He looked at the young scholar steadily. "The stream holds the mountain's water the way you hold your understanding, as something separate from itself that it is carrying. But when the stream reaches the sea, it discovers that what it was carrying and what it is made of are the same thing. The carrying stops, not because the water is gone, because the carrying was never necessary." "And the clarity?" the young scholar said. "The precision?" "A clarity that is truly yours does not need to be carried," the elder said. "It simply is how you see. You do not need to hold your own eyes." The young scholar turned this over for a long time. The anxiety did not immediately dissolve. These things rarely do. But over the following months, as he worked with what the elder had said, he found that the understanding did not actually require the effort he had been spending on it. It was there whether he defended it or not. It was his in the way his own sight was his, not as an acquisition, but as a nature. And what he discovered in the next stage, to his surprise, was not less than what he had had. It was the same understanding, held without the strain of the holding, which turned out to feel, from the inside, like considerably more. Hasidic teaching on the relationship between what is earned and what is owned holds a specific and important distinction. Earned things can be lost because the conditions that produce them can change. But the person who has done genuine inner work has been changed by that work in a way that persists, even when the external markers of the work, the recognition, the formal status, the position, are removed. The concept of avoda, inner work, the work of the soul, in Hasidic tradition is precisely this distinction. The person who has done avoda is different in their essential nature from how they were before the work, not different in a way that can be displayed or certified or lost to external circumstances, different in the way that a river that has carved its path through certain terrain is different from a river that has not. The path is in it. The having been through certain things is in it, and this does not leave. There is also in Hasidic tradition the teaching that simcha, joy, is not a feeling that can be maintained or defended, but a quality that arises naturally in the person who is genuinely present to their own life. The effort to maintain the joy is the thing that blocks it. The joy, like the understanding, like the essential self, does not need to be held. It arises when the holding stops. This connects directly to the young scholar's anxiety. The anxiety about losing the understanding was, in a specific sense, the only thing capable of interfering with the understanding. The understanding itself was safe. The anxiety was using energy that could have been used to understand more. Think about something in your life that you believe you could lose, and ask yourself whether it is genuinely yours in the way that a nature is yours. The understanding you have of yourself, the genuine self-knowledge, the capacity for care, the quality of attention you bring to the people you love, these are yours in the way that the Hasidic teacher meant. No external circumstance removes them. They were built by the specific journey you have made, and they remain in you regardless of whether the external circumstances that seem to be producing them continue. What can be lost are the circumstances that gave you the opportunity to express what is genuinely yours. But the genuine thing itself, the quality, not the expression, persists. This shows up in ordinary life, in the difference between the person who loses their job and loses their identity, versus the person who loses their job and discovers that their identity was never in the job. Both lose the same thing. Only one of them also loses themselves. The other discovers that what they thought they were protecting was not where the self was living. You may have felt this yourself in a period of loss or change when something you thought was essential to who you were turned out to be a circumstance, and what remained after the circumstance changed was more clearly and essentially you than the circumstance ever was. Right now, in this breath, nothing of what is genuinely yours is at risk. The stream is not losing the mountain's gift when it enters the sea. The mountain's gift is in the water, and water in the sea is exactly as it always was. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel. just how you actually feel, and whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi was interested in the voices that persist in the silence. The way that the sage, who seems to say nothing, says the most important things, and the way that the teacher who speaks very little leaves behind more than the teacher who speaks constantly. The silence is not the absence of the voice. It is the space in which the voice can be genuinely heard. This teaching about silence appears in the context of the stream's journey in a particular way. The stream, moving through a narrow gorge, is loud. Moving through the same volume of open ground, it is quiet. The narrowness produces the sound. The openness produces the silence. And the same water in both cases is moving at the same speed. The sound is not a feature of the water, it is a feature of the constraint. When we are constrained by urgency, by fear, by the insistence that we must arrive somewhere specific by a particular time, we are loud in a way that is not a feature of who we are. It is a feature of the constraint. And when the constraint is removed, the silence that was always there becomes audible again. The Zen tradition speaks of this silence not as emptiness, but as fullness. The silence that is full of the whole, that contains everything and therefore is not nothing. This is the silence of the sea, not the silence of absence, but the silence of something so complete that it does not need to speak. There was once a student who was afraid of becoming silent. She had come to the practice with words. She was eloquent, quick-thinking, able to articulate what she was experiencing with a facility that her teachers had, at various points, both praised and gently questioned. She understood that the practice was not primarily about words, but words were how she understood herself, how she connected with others, how she made sense of her experience. The idea that the practice might take her somewhere beyond words felt, to her, like the practice was asking for something she was not willing to give. The idea that the practice might take her somewhere beyond words felt to her like the practice was asking for something she was not willing to give. So the thinking exists before the words, the teacher said, and the words come after the thinking to make it communicable. Yes, and in becoming communicable, the teacher said, does the thinking change? The student was quiet for a moment. This was a question she had not been asked before. Sometimes, she said, sometimes putting it into words clarifies it, and sometimes the words I had available changed the shape of the thinking, because I was using the words I already knew rather than the words the thinking actually needed. Yes, the teacher said, this is the narrowing of the gorge. The words are available, the thinking presses through the available words, and what comes out is the thinking shaped by what the gorge could accommodate, not the thinking itself. She paused. The silence is not the absence of the thinking, it is the thinking before the gorge. The student sat with this, and then she said, "But if I never put it into words, how do I know I've thought it? How do I know it's real?" "The stream knows it is real," the teacher said, "without words, without anyone certifying its existence. It simply moves." She looked at the student with something warm. "You are afraid that without the words you will not be witnessed, that the experience will pass and there will be nothing to show for it." She was quiet for a moment. But consider, every experience passes. The words you put it into also pass. You forget them, or the person you told them to forgets, or the notebook is lost. What the stream leaves behind is the channel it carved. What you leave behind is the person you have become by having the experience. The words are the attempt to preserve what cannot be preserved. The channel is always already there. The student sat in silence for some time after this. It was, as she later described it, not the silence of having nothing to say. It was the silence of not needing to say it right now. The thinking was happening. She could feel it happening. And for once, she was not running ahead of it with words, trying to catch what was still in motion and fix it to a page. When she finally spoke, she said, "It is larger in here." "Yes," the teacher said, "the gorge is narrower than the water." Zen teaching on silence begins with the recognition that the whole of the tradition is an attempt to communicate what cannot be communicated, and that this is not a failure, but the whole point. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, and the teacher who points clearly enough is the teacher who allows the student to look past the finger. The koan tradition, the short, often paradoxical questions given to students as objects of meditation, is partly an exercise in exhausting the word-making capacity. The student who tries to answer a koan with words arrives eventually at the fact that the words are inadequate, and in that inadequacy, something else becomes possible. The silence behind the words, the space where the thinking happens before it has been pressed through the gorge of available language. Dogen, the 13th century Japanese teacher, held that the practice of zazen, sitting meditation, was not a means to an end, but the direct expression of what is being sought. The silence of sitting is not the silence before enlightenment. It is enlightenment, directly, in the form of sitting. The stream is not silence before the sea. It is already the sea, moving. The student's discovery that the silence is larger than the words that come from it is this Zen teaching in its felt form. Not doctrine, not argument, but the direct experience of what happens when the gorge is removed and the water has room to be what it is. Think about where in your life the gorge is narrower than the water. The experience that is larger than what you can say about it. The feeling that is more complete than any description you have been able to make of it. The understanding that, when you try to explain it, comes out smaller than it was before you put it into words. Not because the words were inadequate, but because the words are always a narrowing, always the particular channel the water had available, and the water was always wider than the channel. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific frustration of trying to describe an experience of beauty, or grief, or love, and finding that the description is accurate, and yet somehow entirely misses the thing itself. The description is the gorge. The thing itself is the water that flowed through the gorge and left the description behind, having already moved on. You may have felt this yourself in the quality of an experience that you decided not to try to put into words, that you let simply be what it was, without the attempt to fix it into language, and how that experience remained more vivid and more present in you than the ones you had carefully described. The described ones live in the description. The undescribed ones live in you. Right now, in this breath, there are no words required. The experience of this moment, the warmth, the weight of the body, the quality of the dark, does not need a description to be real. It does not need to be witnessed in words to have happened. The stream that moves in the night has not failed by being invisible. It is simply moving in the dark toward where it is going. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi returned often to the theme of gui, returning, going back, the quality of coming home. Not home as a place left behind, but home as a quality that is available anywhere. The quality of genuine rest in the present moment, wherever the present moment happens to be located. The stream that has been traveling for a long time does not have a home to return to in the sense of a specific place. Its home is the sea, which it has not yet reached. And yet, Zhuangzi suggests the quality of home is not withheld from the stream until the sea is reached. The stream is at home in the moving, in the particular moment of its particular flow, in the relationship between its own nature and the terrain it is currently expressing that nature through. This is the Celtic teaching of the thin place, the place where the boundary between the ordinary world and the sacred world is nearly invisible, where the two press against each other until they are almost one. The Celtic understanding is that these thin places are everywhere, not only in specific sacred locations. The sacred is always pressing against the ordinary. What varies is the quality of the ordinary person's attention to this fact. The traveler who is always looking ahead, always marking where they have been so they can find their way back to a specific home, is not more connected to home than the traveler who understands that home presses through the present moment, wherever the present moment is. The first traveler is homesick. The second is always already home. There was once a traveler who kept stopping to mark where she had been. She was not superstitious about this practice. It had a practical origin. Early in her life, she had become genuinely lost and genuinely frightened, and had promised herself that she would never again be without the ability to return to where she had started. So she developed the habit of marking her path. Scratches on stones, arrangements of small objects, the particular way she would break a branch at a turning point. She left behind, wherever she went, a trail that would bring her home. What she did not notice for many years was the quality of attention this practice required. The marking of where she had been was a continuous occupation of the mind, a running inventory of what had been left at what point in what order. And this occupation of the mind meant that she was not entirely wherever she currently was. Part of her was always already one step back, placing the mark. Part of her was already imagining the return. She met a wandering poet one evening at the edge of a forest, one of those people who seem to have been traveling for their entire lives and who carry this lightly, as though the traveling itself is home. "You mark your trail," the poet said, watching her leave a scratch on a nearby stone. "So I can find my way back," she said. "Back to what?" the poet asked. She looked at him. "Home." Where is home? She described it, the place she had left from, the people there, the particular landscape. And when you are there, the poet said, are you always there, or are you sometimes already marking where you might go next in case you need to find your way back? She opened her mouth to answer, and then did not. I ask, the poet said, sitting down on the stone she had just marked, because I have been walking a long time, and I have noticed that the people who are most attached to finding their way back are often the people who are never entirely where they are. They leave part of themselves at each place as a marker. And by the time they have been many places, there is not much of them left for wherever they currently are. But without the marks, she said, how do you find your way? I follow what interests me, the poet said, not without care. I know the signs of weather, I know how to read the land, but I do not try to hold every past position in order. I trust that if I need to be somewhere I have been before, I will find it when I need it. He looked at the forest's edge. The stream does not carry a map of everywhere it has flowed, and yet it always knows where it is going. And if it can't find its way back, she asked, then it has arrived somewhere new, the poet said, with something that was entirely a smile, which is often worth considerably more than returning to where it started. She sat with this for a long time. She did not stop marking her trail that evening. The habit was too old to abandon in a single conversation. But something shifted in the relationship between herself and the marks. She began to notice, for the first time, how much of her attention the marking consumed. And in noticing, she began, gradually, to notice also that when the attention was not occupied by the marking, it was available for something else, for the actual quality of wherever she was, which had been present the whole time, waiting for the part of her that was always looking backward to finally, briefly, look here. Celtic wisdom traditions hold the concept of the thin place, Caolite in Irish, as fundamental to the understanding of where the sacred is located. Sacred places exist in this tradition not as exceptional sites, but as places where the ordinary thinness between the seen and unseen worlds becomes perceptible. And the teaching across many Celtic traditions is that this thinness is universally present and only locally perceptible, meaning that the perceptibility depends not on the place but on the quality of the person's attention. The wanderer who has cultivated the quality of being fully present to wherever they are has, in the Celtic understanding, cultivated the ability to perceive the thin places anywhere. The traveller who is always thinking about where they have been and where they need to return to has cultivated the opposite quality, a kind of attentional thickness, a barrier between themselves and the thinness that is always present. There is also in Celtic tradition the figure of the Peregrini, the early Irish monks who would set out in small boats without rudders, trusting the wind and current to take them wherever God intended, with no intention of returning. These were not irresponsible people. They were people who had made a specific spiritual choice, to release the orientation toward a particular home and discover what was available when home ceased to be a specific place and became whatever quality of presence they carried with them. The traveller's gradual discovery that the marking was using the attention that was needed for the present is this Celtic teaching in its ordinary form. Think about the attention that is currently occupied in tracking where you have been, rather than being here. Not all of it. Some attention rightly belongs to the past, to what was said in a conversation that still matters, to the pattern of events that gives the present its meaning. This is legitimate attention. The marking that is not legitimate is the marking that serves no purpose except to make return possible, when there is nothing worth returning to that is not already in you. Think of the specific version of this in your own life, the mental tab that stays open, tracking some situation that has already resolved, just in case it becomes unresolved. The attention given to maintaining awareness of where you stand with someone, not because the standing needs to be managed, but because it would be alarming to find yourself not knowing. The general background process of keeping track of the path back, when what you need most is to be fully where you are. This shows up in ordinary life in the quality of a conversation where the person across from you is fully with you, versus one where they are also, behind their eyes, somewhere else. You can feel the difference. And the somewhere else is usually not a better place. It is usually maintenance, monitoring, the tracking of the trail. You may have felt this yourself in the specific relief of a moment when the monitoring genuinely stopped, when, for a stretch of time, you were simply here and the tracking was not running, and how completely present that felt, and how much was available in it that the monitoring had been using. Right now, in this breath, you can set down the stone you were going to leave as a marker. The way back, if you need it, will be there. The stream has never needed to mark its path to find the sea. Let the attention that was keeping track come back to where you actually are. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. One of Zhuangzi's deepest teachings is the one he expressed through the story of the cook and the ox, that mastery arrives when the practitioner stops working against the nature of what they are working with and instead moves through it. What seems like enormous difficulty, when approached this way, reveals itself to have always had spaces, natural openings, inherent grain, the direction the thing itself is inclined to go. Applied to the stream's journey, this teaching suggests something about how we understand the feeling of traveling alone. The stream that believes it is carving its path through solid resistance, doing something unprecedented, encountering difficulty that no water has encountered before. That stream is wrong, not about the difficulty being real, but about its own uniqueness in the face of it. Water has always flowed through terrain like this. The path already exists in the structure of the terrain, waiting for the water that will follow it. Ubuntu philosophy expresses this as Ubuntu itself, the quality of being a person through other persons, the recognition that the individual's journey is never, at the deepest level, an individual journey. Every stream believes it is traveling alone. But the footprints of every stream that has flowed here before are in the terrain itself, in the path the water finds, in the spaces that were opened by what came before. We are never the first to feel what we are feeling. The particular form is new. The water is not. There was once a young person who was certain they were alone. Not alone in the obvious way. They had family, they had community, they had people who knew their name and would have noticed if they were missing. But alone in the way that the stream might feel alone. The sense that their particular journey, with its particular difficulty and its particular quality of being lost in a specific way, was one that no one else had made. That the thing they were carrying was genuinely unprecedented, that there was no footprint here to follow because no one had come this way before. An elder in the community watched this young person for some time. She had lived long enough to recognize the particular quality of a person who believes their difficulty is unique, not from arrogance, but from the specific isolation of suffering, which always feels new from the inside. She invited the young person to sit with her one afternoon in front of the elder's own house, where they could see the path that ran through the center of the community. "Who has walked this path?" the elder asked. The young person looked at it. "Many people," they said. "The whole community. Many generations." "And before our community?" the elder asked. "Others who were here before us," the young person said. "Further back, whoever was here first. And if you look at the path," the elder said, "what do you see?" The young person looked more carefully. The path was well worn in the places that were most traveled, the particular line that decades of feet had preferred, the slight depression where the ground had given way to all that passing. The path had been made by the feet, and the feet that came after had followed the path that the earlier feet had made. "I see where people have been," the young person said. "Where you are going," the elder said, "there is a path. Not because someone came before you and left a map, but because the difficulty you are in is a difficulty that other feet have worn through. The ground remembers." She paused. "What you feel is new. What you are going through is not new. The specific form is yours. The water is old. But I can't see anyone else," the young person said. "I feel like no one understands what I'm going through." "Yes," the elder said, with great gentleness. "This is always how it feels. This is how it felt to the people who wore this path before you felt it. Every single one of them felt alone." She was quiet for a moment. "Feeling alone does not mean being alone. The path exists because you are not the first." The young person was quiet. They were looking at the path, at the particular shape of it, the places where it curved, the places where it was deepest. "Who wore those places deepest?" they asked. "People who had the same question you have," the elder said. "People who felt exactly what you feel, who also couldn't see anyone beside them, and who made it to the other side of this place, and in making it, wore the path a little deeper." She looked at the young person. "You are not carving new ground. You are following what has been opened before you, and when you have passed through, you will have worn it a little deeper for whoever comes after." The young person was quiet for a long time. Then they asked something that surprised the elder. "Did you ever feel this?" The elder looked at them. "Why do you think I know the path so well?" she said. The young person looked at her, at the quality of stillness she carried, the quality that had seemed, until this moment, like the stillness of someone who had always been still. And they saw something different now, not the stillness of someone who had never been in the difficult place, but the stillness of someone who had been through it and come out the other side, carrying the knowledge of the crossing. "And you were alone?" the young person asked. As alone as you are, the elder said, and you made it through. And I wore the path a little deeper, the elder said simply, as you will. The young person did not immediately feel less alone. These things do not resolve in a single conversation, but something shifted in the quality of the aloneness. It became a different kind of alone, not the alone of being the only one who has ever been here, but the alone of being the one who is here right now, in a place that others have been, walking a path that others have worn, which is a different quality of aloneness entirely. Ubuntu philosophy, developed in the sub-Saharan African traditions, holds at its center the principle that a person becomes a person through other persons, not in the obvious social sense, but in the deeper sense. The full expression of what a human being is requires the presence, the recognition, the relationship with other human beings. We do not become ourselves alone. We become ourselves in the encounter with others who see us and are seen by us. Applied to the experience of feeling alone in difficulty, Ubuntu suggests that the difficulty itself is not unprecedented, because the human experience of difficulty is shared across the whole of human history. Every person who has ever lived has felt what you are feeling in some form. The specific form changes, the feeling does not. And the community of those who have felt it, stretching across every generation, every culture, every terrain, is the largest community there is. There is also in Ubuntu philosophy the concept of isithunzi, dignity, the presence that a person carries with them, which is understood as something cultivated in community, not achieved alone. The young person's difficulty is wearing them down in a way that is affecting their isithunzi, and the elder's response, showing them the path, showing them the footprints, is a way of returning to the young person the recognition that the difficulty they are in is human difficulty, which is to say, difficulty that has been survived, and the surviving of which is part of what the community carries. The path is worn deep for a reason. It is the record of the community's accumulated survival of what seemed unsurvivable. Think about the difficulty you are carrying that feels unprecedented. The specific form is yours. There is no question about this. Your particular configuration of circumstances, your particular way of experiencing what you are going through, your specific quality of being in it, this is genuinely new, because you are genuinely new. But the water is old. The feeling of being lost in exactly this way has been felt. The quality of the particular darkness you are in has been moved through before. The path exists because other feet have been here, and the proof is that you can feel the path under your own feet, the slight sense in the hardest places that the ground is prepared for this kind of weight, that the terrain knows the shape of this difficulty because it has received this difficulty before. This shows up in ordinary life in the relief of encountering, in a book or a conversation or a piece of music, the exact quality of what you are going through, expressed by someone else in another time, from another place, using different words, and the recognition you were not alone, you never were. The form was yours. The feeling was shared. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of being understood, not just sympathized with, but actually understood by someone who had been in a place similar enough to yours that they could meet you there, and how the understanding changed the quality of the difficulty, not by removing it, but by removing the particular extra weight of believing you were the only one. Right now, in this breath, the path under you is worn. You are not the first. The difficulty you are moving through is human difficulty. The water is ancient, and the sea at the end of the path has received every stream that has ever flowed. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi understood something about trust that most of us learn, if we learn it, only after much practice. That the effort to control the outcome is often the single largest obstacle to the outcome arriving. The cook who releases the knife into the ox's natural spaces does not trust the knife less than the cook who forces it. He trusts it more. He trusts it enough to allow it to do what it does, rather than overriding the doing with management. For the navigator on the open sea, this teaching appears in the relationship between effort and surrender. The ocean is larger than any map, older than any technique, wiser than any single person's understanding of how to move through it. The navigator who tries to control the ocean, to force the vessel through the water rather than reading the water and moving with what it offers, will be slower and more exhausted than the navigator who reads and responds. This is not passivity. Polynesian wayfinding is enormously demanding. It requires constant, exquisitely attentive, fully embodied presence. But the attention is directed not at imposing a planned route, but at reading what is actually there. The swell from one direction, the stars in their positions, the birds that indicate land, the color of the water that indicates current. The wayfinder is in constant dialogue with the ocean, and the ocean in this dialogue is always saying something. The stream's trust in the terrain, its willingness to follow where the terrain opens, rather than insisting on a direction the terrain has not prepared for, is this Polynesian trust in its natural form. There was once a young navigator who could not stop charting. She had grown up learning the stars and the swells and the birds and the color of the water, the traditional skills of her people, the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of moving across the ocean. She was genuinely skilled. People who traveled with her arrived where they intended to arrive. But something in the way she worked worried her elders in a way that was difficult to articulate. The elder who finally tried to articulate it was a woman who had been navigating the same ocean routes for most of her adult life, and who possessed the quality that the young navigator was working toward, a stillness in the doing, a quality of being entirely at home on open water that made even the most demanding passages look untroubled. "You're always checking," the elder said to her one morning midway through a long crossing. "Checking what?" the young navigator asked. "Everything," the elder said. "You check the stars, and then you check your position, and then you check the stars again, and then you check the swell, and then you check whether the swell matches what you expected, and then you check your position against the swell and the stars together. "This is how I navigate," the young navigator said. "Yes," the elder said, "and it is accurate navigation. You arrive where you intend to arrive." She was quiet for a moment. "But you are not talking with the ocean. You are interrogating it. There is a difference." The young navigator was not sure what the elder meant. "When I go out to navigate," the elder said, "I am in a conversation. The ocean is saying things about what the sky will do, about where the current is going, about what this particular body of water knows that I don't. And my navigation is my response to what it is saying." She looked at the young navigator. "When you go out to navigate, you have already decided where you are going and how you will get there, and you are checking the ocean's answers against your plan. If they match, you continue. If they don't, you adjust. This is competent, but it is not listening." "And if I listened," the young navigator said, "would I still arrive?" "You would arrive differently," the elder said. "You would arrive the way the water arrives, not at the position you planned exactly, but at the place the ocean was always moving you toward, which is often better than the position you planned." She paused. "And the crossing would be—" she seemed to look for the word. "Effortless is not quite right. Full. It would be full." The young navigator tried this in the remaining days of the crossing, not abandoning her skills. She kept reading the stars and the swell, but changing the quality of the reading, from checking to listening, from interrogating the answers against her plan to genuinely attending to what the ocean was offering. The crossing did not go entirely as she had planned. There was a current she had not anticipated that took them somewhat off the direct route. In the past, she would have worked against it, spending energy and time on forcing the vessel back to the planned line. Instead, she listened. The current was going somewhere. Where was it going? It was going, she realized after attending to it for some time, past a resting point where they could take on water. A stop she had not planned on needing, but that, upon reflection, would be useful. They stopped. They took on water. They continued. They arrived 2 days after the original plan at the same destination, with something the young navigator had not had at the beginning of the crossing: the sense that the ocean had been in conversation with her and had had something useful to say, and she had been listening. Polynesian wayfinding traditions, developed across the Pacific over thousands of years of open ocean navigation, represent one of the most sophisticated bodies of practical knowledge in human history. The ability to navigate across thousands of miles of featureless ocean using only the natural world as instrument. What is remarkable about these traditions, and what connects them to Zhuangzi's teaching, is the quality of attention they require, an attention that is not imposed on the ocean, but in dialogue with it. The wayfinder reads the key holo, the current, not as a data point to be added to a calculation, but as a message from the ocean about its own movement, to which the navigator responds. The concept of mana in Polynesian tradition is relevant here, the authority or power that flows through the person who is genuinely in right relationship with what they are engaging. The wayfinder who has mana is not the one with the best calculation. It is the one in genuine dialogue with the ocean, the one the ocean trusts enough to speak to clearly, because the navigator is listening well enough to hear. There is also in Polynesian navigation the teaching that the wayfinder does not move through the ocean. The ocean moves through the wayfinder. The stars are not consulted, they are felt. The swell is not measured, it is known in the body. This is the cook's knowing, translated to ocean, not the analytical knowing of a calculation, but the embodied knowing of long intimacy. The young navigator's discovery that listening is different from interrogating, and that what the ocean has to say is worth hearing, is this tradition's most practical teaching. Think about where in your life you are interrogating instead of listening. The conversation you are in while simultaneously checking whether it is going as you planned. The relationship you are tending while simultaneously monitoring whether it is developing as you hoped. The creative work you are doing while simultaneously evaluating whether it is arriving at what you imagined. In all of these, part of the attention is in the present, and part of the attention is in the evaluation of the present against the plan. And the evaluation uses exactly the attention that the listening needs. The ocean cannot speak to someone who is checking their notes. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific difference between a meal cooked while fully attending to the cooking, tasting, adjusting, responding to what the ingredients are offering, and a meal cooked while implementing a recipe exactly as written. Both meals can be good, but only one of them is in dialogue with the food. And the cook who is in dialogue with the food can produce something from whatever ingredients are available, because they are not dependent on the ingredients matching what the recipe specified. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of a conversation where you were not planning your next response, but genuinely present with what the other person was saying, and how much more they said, and how much more moved between you, in the presence of that genuine listening. Right now, in this breath, the ocean is speaking. Not with words, with the specific quality of this moment, the weight of the body, the rhythm of the breath, the particular quality of the dark around you. The interrogation can stop. The notes can be set down. The ocean knows where it is going. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi wrote about the relationship between the sage and the Tao, the way, in a way that is best understood not as the sage following the Tao, but as the sage expressing it. The sage is not separate from the Tao and trying to stay aligned with it. The sage is, in moments of genuine wisdom, the Tao moving through a human form. Not the same as the Tao is the ocean, a component in a larger system, but the Tao as the stream is the water, entirely the thing in a particular form at a particular moment. This teaching appears in the Aboriginal Australian understanding of country as something you carry within you rather than something you leave behind. The country is not the specific land, it is the relationship between the person and the land, the songs that map the land, the ancestral knowledge that the land and the person hold together. And a person does not lose their country by leaving it. The country travels with them, in the songs, in the relationship, in the quality of knowing that was developed in the country's presence. This is what the stream carries from the mountain, not a piece of the mountain, but the having been in relationship with the mountain. The water has moved through the mountain's stone, has taken on the mountain's particular mineral quality, has been shaped by the mountain's specific contours. The mountain is in the water, not as a possession, but as a relationship. And the water carries this relationship into the sea, where it contributes the mountain's particular quality to the whole. There was once a young person who could not leave their country's song behind. They had grown up in a place with a particular quality of light and a particular smell of the earth after rain and a particular sound of a specific bird at a specific time of morning. These were not details that would appear on a map. They were the texture of what home meant, the felt, sensory, deeply ordinary quality of the place where they had learned to be a person. When the time came to travel far away, for reasons that were reasonable and right, and that the young person had chosen, they found in the first months of the journey that what they missed was not the large things, but these small ones, the particular light, the particular smell, the bird. An elder who was known for having travelled very widely and yet for carrying the country unmistakably in every gesture offered to spend some time with the young person. "You carry it still," the elder said, when the young person described what was missing. "How can I carry it?" the young person asked. "I am very far from it." "Where do you think the country is?" the elder asked. The young person gestured vaguely in what they believed was the direction of home. "What you are pointing at," the elder said, "is the land. The land is in that direction." She paused. "But the country is not only the land. The country is the knowing, the relationship between you and the land, the songs that connect you to the ancestors who were in the land before you, the understanding of the land that your body carries from having grown up there." She looked at the young person. "Can you hear the bird?" "Here?" the young person said. "No, it doesn't live here. Hear it in your memory," the elder said, "not as a longing, as a genuine hearing. Close your eyes if it helps." The young person closed their eyes, and the bird was there, not as an absence, not as a wish, but as an actual presence in the memory, specific and complete and real. "That," the elder said, when the young person opened their eyes, "is the country. The bird is not the country. The relationship between you and the bird, the years of hearing it, the morning quality of it, the way it is woven into your sense of what morning means, that relationship is the country, and you are carrying it." "It doesn't feel the same as being there," the young person said. "No," the elder agreed. "Being there and carrying it are different qualities of the same relationship. When you are in the land, the relationship is full and immediate. When you are far away, the relationship is internal, but it is the same relationship." She paused. "The stream carries the mountain, not the stone, the relationship with the stone, and when it reaches the sea, it brings that relationship with it. The sea, which is made of every stream, is made of every relationship that every stream carried from every place it began." The young person thought about this. "So the sea knows the mountain?" they asked. "The sea is the gathered knowing of everywhere the water has been," the elder said. "And the water that reaches the sea from your country brings your country's knowing to that gathering." She looked at the young person steadily. You are not losing your country by being far from the land. You are carrying it somewhere it has not yet been, which is its own kind of gift. The young person did not stop missing the land. Missing is real and is not easily resolved by understanding. But something in how they held the missing changed. It became less like a wound and more like a weight they were carrying for a reason, toward a place where the carrying would be meaningful. Aboriginal Australian knowledge systems, songlines, dreaming, the complex relationships between people, country, ancestors, and the living landscape, carry a specific teaching about what travels when a person moves away from their country. The concept of the songline, a path across the landscape that is also a song, also a story, also an ancestral memory, holds that the country is mapped not in coordinates, but in knowledge. To know the song is to know the country, wherever you are, and to carry the song is to carry the country in the form it takes when the land itself is not present. Aboriginal Australian philosophy also holds that country has responsibilities as well as rights, that the relationship between person and country is mutual, that the country needs the person to know it and sing it and maintain the relationship as much as the person needs the country for their own identity and belonging. A person far from their country is someone whose country is waiting to be returned to, whose songs need to be sung to keep the connection alive. This teaching connects directly to Zhuangzi's understanding. The country is not where you are. The country is what you are in relationship with, and the relationship, once genuinely formed, persists across distance, not unchanged, but present. The young person's discovery that the bird in the memory is a real form of the relationship with country, not an inferior substitute for the relationship, is this teaching in its most personal form. Think about the country you carry, not geography, but relationship. The people who formed you and who are not physically present. The place where you learned what beauty meant, or what safety meant, or what belonging meant. The relationships that built what you are, that are not currently in the room, but that are present in everything you do. These are your country. They travel with you. They are in the quality of your attention, in the way you receive the people currently in your life, in the specific things that move you because they are related to the things that moved you first. They are present without being here. They are the mountain in the water. This shows up in ordinary life in the way we carry people we love who are not present, not as longing only, but as living presence. The way someone we learned from speaks in us when we face a difficulty similar to one they helped us navigate. The way a place we loved shows up in how we recognize beauty in a different place. The relationship persists in the person who carries it. You may have felt this yourself in a moment of recognizing, in a completely different place, the quality of something you loved very much somewhere else, and the particular warmth of that recognition, which is the country in you recognizing itself in a new form. Right now, in this breath, you are carrying everything that has ever genuinely formed you. None of it is absent. It is in you, in the quality of how you are here. The stream at the edge of the sea carries the whole of the mountain. You carry the whole of what has made you. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi's understanding of death was neither afraid nor eager. He famously sat beside his wife's grave and was found singing, and when his friend was scandalized, he explained that she had come from the great transformation and had returned to it, and this seemed to him correct and natural rather than tragic. The form had changed. What was essential had not, could not be lost, because what was essential was the Tao itself, expressed for a while in a particular human form, and now expressed in another. This teaching about the threshold, about the crossing from one form of being to another, appears in the Mayan understanding of Xibalba, the underworld, and the crossings that must be made between the different levels of existence. The Mayan understanding is not one of death as ending, but of death as transformation, as the crossing of a threshold into a different mode of the same continuity. The stream at the edge of the sea is at such a threshold. The name of the stream is about to change. The shape of the stream, the contained channel, the particular identity of this water going this way, is about to dissolve into something that has no name for the specific stream. And this feels, from the stream's perspective, like the end of something. But it is the sea's beginning, not a new sea, the same sea that has always been there, but a sea that is now, in some infinitesimal and real way, larger. There was once an elder keeper of the calendar who was approaching the end of her life. She was not afraid of dying in the way that some people are afraid. She had spent most of her adult life working with the calendar that tracked the great cycles of time, and she understood, in a way that was very deep in her, that cycles turn. What comes in goes out. What was full becomes empty. What was alive becomes something else that is also alive, only differently. What she was afraid of, or not exactly afraid but uncertain about, was whether the things she had learned would survive her, not the information which was written down and would persist, the quality of knowing, the particular understanding that had developed over decades of attention to the great patterns of time and season and the relationship between the human and the celestial. This was not transmissible in writing. It lived in the specific way she held what she knew, and she was not sure it would transfer. She had been talking with a young apprentice about this, with more honesty than she usually allowed herself, and the young man had listened carefully and then had said something that surprised her. "What you are afraid of losing," he said, "is what I am becoming." She looked at him. "I don't mean that I have what you have," he said quickly. "I know I don't. What I mean is, I have been sitting beside you for 10 years. The quality of knowing you are worried about is what I have been trying to learn. Not from what you said, from how you looked at the sky, from the quality of your attention in the morning when you first went out, from the particular way you became still when you were reading something difficult in the pattern." He paused. "That transferred. I can feel it in me. Not as a skill I can demonstrate, as a quality of attention I sometimes have that I did not have before I knew you." The elder was quiet for a long time. "You learned from how I looked at the sky," she said finally. "More than from what you said about the sky," he said. She thought about this. She had been imagining the transmission of knowledge as something like the transmission of water through a pipe, direct, contained, the same substance arriving intact at the destination. But perhaps, she considered now, the transmission of a quality of knowing was more like the stream entering the sea. The specific form of the knowledge was transformed in the entering, became part of the larger knowing of the person who received it, and was not identifiable afterward as a discrete thing. But the sea was changed by it in ways that expressed in every drop. "I will become water," she said, "not to him, not quite, but to something." "You already are," the young man said, with a simplicity that caught her off guard. "The water that is in the sea, the knowing that is in me, that is yours. The stream enters the sea and the stream ends, and the sea is larger. But which part of the sea is not the stream? None of it, all of it." She went to sleep that night with the image in her mind. And in the weeks that followed, she spoke more freely to her apprentice than she had before. Not teaching exactly. Teaching maintains a certain organizing distance, more like telling. She told him what she had noticed over many decades, things she had not expected to put into words. The telling felt now more natural than the holding back, as though the water had been waiting a long time for the edge and had finally found it. The apprentice listened without taking notes. He simply received what was coming in the way that the sea receives what comes to it, without sorting, without evaluating, with the full confidence that whatever arrives is water, and water belongs here. When the time came, she crossed the threshold without much of the uncertainty she had anticipated, not because the uncertainty had been resolved, but because the stream, she had decided, does not need to know what the sea is going to do with it. Mayan cosmological tradition holds a complex and richly elaborated understanding of the nature of time and transformation, one in which what we might call death is understood as a threshold, a transformation of form, a crossing from one mode of being to another within the continuous cycles of existence. The concept of chulel, the animating essence, the quality of life that inhabits all living things, is understood in Mayan tradition not as something that ends at death, but as something that transforms. The chulel of the elder who has died does not disappear. It enters a different part of the great cycle, becomes available in different ways, is present in the living through the quality of relationship that existed between the elder and those who knew them. The Mayan calendar itself, with its interlocking cycles of 260 days and 365 days, its longer cycles of Tun and Katun and Baktun, is a teaching about the nonlinearity of time, about the way that what has been always returns in some form, the way that the end of a cycle is also the beginning of the next. There is no waste in the Mayan understanding of time. Everything that has occurred is available to the great pattern. Nothing is lost. The elder's discovery that the quality of her knowing had transferred not through instruction but through the shared quality of attention over years is this Mayan understanding in its most intimate form. The shulel of the teaching was already in the sea. Think about what you are afraid will not survive you. Not everyone holds this fear consciously, but many of us carry some version of it, the sense that what is most particular and most valuable about us is at risk, that if we are not present to maintain it, it will not persist. The specific quality of understanding, the specific way of caring, the specific knowledge that only we have of the specific people we love. Consider the Elder's discovery that what has genuinely transferred cannot be separated from the person it transferred to. That the knowing you have given to others, not through instruction, but through the quality of attention you brought to your time with them, is in them now as a quality of how they see, not as a fact they can cite. It does not require your maintenance. It is already the sea. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific comfort of recognizing in the people you love something that came from you and is now simply who they are. Not because they are copying you, because the quality transferred and became their own quality and no longer needs you to be present in order to persist. You may have felt this yourself in the particular quality of recognizing in a younger person some quality or understanding that you once received from someone older. The way the transmission continues beyond any individual in the form of people who carry what they were given into everything they do. Right now, in this breath, what is truly yours is already safe. Not in the keeping, in the giving. The water that has entered the sea has not been lost. It is the sea. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi returned, at the end of the text that carries his name, to the image of the great transformation, the quality of change that underlies all forms, that expresses itself in the butterfly and the cook and the philosopher and the stream, that is not interrupted by what we call endings, but simply takes new form as it always has, as it always will. The Norse understanding of the cosmos was built around a similar recognition, that the world goes through cycles of ending and renewal. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, is not only destruction but preparation, the clearing of what has become too rigid and too defended for the new growth that is coming. The old world's ending is the new world's beginning. This was not understood as tragedy in the deepest Norse telling. It was understood as the nature of things. What cannot be otherwise is not to be mourned. The stream that has reached the sea has ended its journey as a stream. This is real. The specific form is over. The name is dissolved in the larger name. And this ending, which looks from the outside like loss, is from the sea's perspective the addition of this particular journey's water to the vast. Every current, every drop, every story of every stream that has ever reached here, now part of the whole, that moves and returns and evaporates and falls as rain and becomes stream again and moves again toward the sea. What feels like loss at the end is only ever arrival. There was once an old chieftain who feared the loss of his name. He had lived a full life, not without difficulty, but genuinely full. He had done things he was proud of, and things he was not proud of, and had tried, as best he could, to make the balance weigh toward the good. He had been loved. He had loved in return. His name was known in the places where names were kept. But the time was coming when the keeping would end. Not all at once. These things rarely happen all at once. But the decline was clear, and he could see it clearly, which is one of the gifts and one of the difficulties of having lived long enough to recognize what decline looks like. What disturbed him was not death itself. He had made a certain peace with death, the way that people who have thought about it for a long time often do. What disturbed him was the name, the specific identity, the particular shape of a life that had been, for so many decades, the shape of himself. He was afraid that when the name dissolved, the person would dissolve with it. A skald, a poet and keeper of names, came to spend time with him in these final months. It was the skald's role in his tradition to know the names, to hold them, to carry them forward in the poems that were the tradition's form of memory. "I will remember your name," the skald said, "long after you are gone." "And when you are gone?" the chieftain asked. "The poem will be remembered," the skald said, "by someone who heard it. And when they are gone, perhaps by someone who heard it from them. And eventually," the chieftain said, "no one will remember." The skald was quiet for a moment. He was not going to lie to the man. "Eventually," he said, "the specific form of the name will be gone. Yes." "Then it is lost," the chieftain said. "I don't think so," the skald said. He looked at the river that was visible from the house where they sat. "What is in the sea that the river brought down from the mountains 200 years ago?" The chieftain looked at the river. "I don't know," he said. "Water." "The same water that was in the mountains 200 years ago," the skald said. "Not as mountain water, the form is gone, but as sea water. The river entered the sea. The river name is gone, but the water is not gone. It is the sea." He paused. "Your name will enter the sea. The specific form will dissolve, but everything the name was made of, the choices, the love, the work, the quality of how you were present to the people whose lives touched yours, that is already in the sea. It entered while you were still living. Every time your life changed someone else's life, a little of the water passed over the edge." The chieftain was quiet for a long time. "And the sea," he said finally, "does not have a name for each drop." "No," the skald said, "but the sea is made of each drop, all of them, all at once." "Then the sea knows what I was," the chieftain said. "The sea is what you were," the skald said, "and what everything was, and what everything will be in the next form it takes, which will also enter the sea eventually." The chieftain slept that night more deeply than he had slept in many months. Not because the fear had been argued away. The fear was real, and the skald had not pretended otherwise, but because the image had arrived in him in a way that was more than argument. The sense that the sea was already receiving him had been receiving him for decades, drop by drop, and that what he feared as the end was only the last of the water crossing the edge. He was the stream that had been flowing all his life, and the sea was closer than he had known. Norse cosmological tradition holds the concept of word, fate, but also something more complex, the woven quality of existence, the way that every action and every life is woven into the great fabric of what has been and what will be. The Norns, the three weavers at the root of the world tree Yggdrasil, weave word from the threads of individual lives. No thread is wasted. No thread stands alone. Every life that has been woven into the fabric is present in the fabric, changed into the fabric's form, but not lost. This teaching connects to the Skald tradition directly. The Skald's role was not merely to entertain, but to hold the fabric together, to ensure that what had been woven remained present in the community's living memory. The poem was the fabric, and the fabric was real, and what was in the fabric persisted in a form that transcended the individual life. Norse tradition also carries the concept of hamingja, a kind of transferable luck or spirit, a quality of life force that passed from ancestors to descendants, from the dying to the living, in a chain that stretched back through generations. The chieftain's hamingja did not die with him. It flowed forward as the stream flows to the sea, into the people whose lives his life had touched. The Skald's teaching that the name's specific form would dissolve while the water remained is this tradition's own version of the stream and the sea. What is essential cannot be unmade. What has genuinely been cannot be entirely lost. The sea is the total of every stream that has ever reached it, in the form the sea takes. Think about the fear of the name dissolving, in whatever form it takes in your own life. The fear that what is most genuinely you will not be visible in what remains. The fear that the particular quality of your care, your understanding, your presence will dissolve into the general, become indistinguishable, lose the specific shape that makes it yours. Consider the Skald's answer. The water is already crossing over. Every time you have genuinely changed someone's life, not the dramatic changes, the small ones, the ones you have forgotten and they have not, the water crossed. The name is not in the record. The water is in the sea, and the sea is larger for it. This shows up in ordinary life in the irreducible reality of influence, the way that we are shaped in very specific ways by people who had no idea they were shaping us. The teacher who said one sentence that changed how we understood something fundamental. The stranger who did one thing at one moment that shifted the course of a day that turned out to matter. The parent who did not know they were teaching by how they held their morning coffee. All of this water is in the sea, none of it named, all of it present. You may have felt this yourself in the recognition of someone else's formative presence in you, the moment of discovering that a quality you have been living, apparently as your own, was given to you by someone whose name you might barely remember and whose water has been in you for years. Right now, in this breath, the stream has almost reached the sea, not because this moment is the end. The stream has not ended, but because sleep is the sea's preview. This is what the sea feels like, not the ending of you, but the expanding of you into the quiet that was always here, that has always been receiving you, that knows the shape of every stream that has ever arrived. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight we began with a small stream and a very large sea, and the teaching that what feels like loss at the arrival is only ever the completion of what the move-in was always for. Through 13 chapters, we followed that stream through many forms and many traditions. We sat with a Sufi traveler who was carrying stones from every city she had passed through, and learned the difference between carrying the journey and carrying proof of the journey. We followed a young Lakota hunter lost in the dark, who discovered that the water always knows where down is, and down is always connected to home. We sat with a Stoic student who had built a channel and forgotten it was not a river, and who discovered what becomes possible when the walls of the channel give way to the moving water. We explored with a Hindu ascetic who feared the dissolution of self, and who found that what dissolves in the sea is not the water but the boundary the water had believed was essential. We sat with a Buddhist monk whose grief for his teacher had crystallized around the teacher's words, and who discovered that the words were a raft and the teaching was the far shore, already arrived, already in him, not requiring the raft to be held any longer. We watched a Hasidic scholar who feared the next stage would cost him what he had earned, and who discovered that what is genuinely yours cannot be left at any border. We followed a Zen student who was afraid that the silence would take her voice, and who found that the silence was larger than any language, not the absence of expression, but the ground from which expression arises. We walked with a Celtic traveller who marked her path out of fear, and who found that the attention occupied by the marking was exactly the attention the present moment needed. We sat with an Ubuntu elder who showed a young person the depth of the path they were walking, and let them feel that they were not the first feet here. We sailed with a Polynesian navigator who was interrogating the ocean rather than listening to it, and who learned the difference between checking and conversing. We sat with an Aboriginal Australian elder who carried her country as an inner relationship rather than an outer location, and who showed a young traveller what it means to bring your country somewhere it has not yet been. We accompanied a Mayan keeper of the calendar at her life's threshold, who discovered that what she had given had already been received, and that the water was already in the sea. And we ended here with a Norse chieftain who feared the loss of his name, and a poet who showed him that the sea is not the place where names are lost, but the place where all that every stream was made of becomes the vast body of everything that has ever flowed. You are not required to remember all of this. If one image reached you tonight, one small parable, one particular turn of the teaching, let that be enough. The understanding that is genuinely yours will be there in the morning. The rest will find you when you are ready for it. This teaching is not mastered once and then set aside. The stream does not reach the sea and then understand, finally and completely, what water is. The understanding deepens each time you return, each night, each letting go, each small practice of releasing the grip on the accumulated weight of the day. Over time, the releasing becomes easier, not because the weight becomes less, but because you have practiced arriving at the sea enough times to know that it receives you without condition, every time, exactly as you are. The stream does not know it is the sea. It knows it is moving. It knows the moving is toward something, and it trusts, not as a decision, not as an act of faith against doubt, but as the expression of its own nature, that what it is moving toward will receive it. Sleep is the sea tonight, not the end of you, the receiving of you, the brief dissolving into the quiet that is always here, that is made of every night that has ever received every person who has ever rested. The vast, unhurried, unbounded quiet that asks nothing of you except that you keep moving until the moving brings you here, and the here is enough. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here, exactly as you are, with whatever you are carrying and whatever you are ready to set down. Sleep well. And thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night.